you meet with our president?
Not yet. I think this is, I just arrived.
Yeah? Ready? Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you please find your way to your seats? I hope you enjoyed the delicious lunch, but no food comas allowed because we have a really interesting session coming up next, moderated by Mr. Khalid Khalifa, on conflict, forced displacement, and exploitation. Just as we were coming into the room, the news broke that President Biden has made an unannounced trip to Kyiv. And as you know, the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war is coming up. And in 2022, the UNHCR announced that the number of people forced to flee was estimated to have reached 100 million. So today we have a panel of our esteemed colleagues who are experts in this space, and it is my honor to introduce them now, and the panel will be moderated by Mr. Khalid Khalifa. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If I may ask everybody to take their seats, please. And I hope the acoustics are better in the back. Do you hear me? Good? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, partners, friends, good afternoon. My name is Khalid Khalifa. I am a senior advisor to the High Commissioner for Refugees and the representative to the Gulf Cooperation Council. And I am deeply honored to be moderating this session. I would like first to extend my gratitude to the organizers, King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center, for convening us today, for bringing us together in this important gathering. As the title of this session indicates, conflict, forced displacement, and risks of exploitation, the discussion will be cross-sectoral. We will be speaking about different topics related to those three themes.
Hello.
The title suggests complementarity and collaboration in humanitarian response. It highlights the critical role interagency coordination plays in meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. As we gather today, emergent and protracted crises and worsening environmental conditions have further exacerbated suffering and increased humanitarian needs. I am humbled and honored again to moderate such a panel of global humanitarian leaders who need no introduction. I will only mention the names and the organizations the speakers lead, because anything else I would say will not really do justice to the functions they are doing. I would like to invite to the stage first Ms. Maimouna Mohammed Sharif, the Executive Director of the United Nations Human Settlement Program, UN Habitat. Ms. Sharif. Then allow me to call to the stage His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Al-Jasir, the President of the Islamic Development Bank. I would also like to invite to the stage His Excellency Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees. Also His Excellency Mr. Antonio Vitorino, the Director General of the International Organization of Migration, and Mr. Robert Mardini, Director General of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And finally, last but not least, an organization that supports humanitarian work around the globe, Mr. Michael Kohler, Acting Director General of European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. This panel will be about an hour and 15 minutes. And I will be asking the speakers 2 rounds of questions. And if time allows, we will take a couple of questions from the floor. And since the panel is very unbalanced in terms of gender, so allow me to start with Her Excellency, Ms. Maimouna Muhammad Sharif, the UN Habitat Executive Director, and to ask her about the relationship UN Habitat has with UNHCR and other organizations working for the displaced around the world to improve assistance and support most fragile communities. Your work extends to national and local governments as well. You work with mayors and chiefs of villages in many places. And my first question to you is, how can UN Habitat contribute to solutions of forced displacement in urban contexts, noting that most displaced people live in urban settlements rather than in camps and rural areas?
Thank you very much, my friend. I save you, yeah?
Yes, you saved the day.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon to all excellencies and distinguished delegates. I'm very happy to be here and I'll be honored to discuss with amongst the leaders in humanitarian. And as you know, that is most of the crises happen in cities, and especially on the climate change and humanitarian crisis, and the greater challenges of climate change and so crisis is how to build resilient for 3 billion people living in highly vulnerable areas. And out of these 3 billion, 1 billion live in slum. And out of this 1 billion are mainly refugees and IDPs. And UN Habitat is one of the UN agencies, together with my colleagues. We are dealing with human settlement, with cities. As you know, that is urban crises mainly happen in cities. Very seldom happen in outside cities unless it's a very, very big agriculture areas or anything that is happen or available outside the cities. So when you talk about the IDPs and refugees and climate change, it also include migration. Migration, very seldom we heard about rural, urban-rural migration, but I think during COVID it happened. But mostly migration is to the rural and urban areas. And this will stress the capacity, the infrastructure and resources in the cities. And as you see, that is especially in terms of housing, very basic services. I start giving you the background before I share with you what are the UN Habitats is doing. So basic services like water, electricity, sanitation, employment, health. And this is very, very important for us to see that the challenges being taken into account when we do the planning. So there are many failures, and at the same time, cities are adequately or inadequately manage these challenges. And how can we respond successfully? I think as a UN Habitat, we put very clearly in our strategic plan to provide or to better quality of life for people in the urbanizing world, for all in the urbanizing world. We cannot stop urbanization. And at the same time, we are very happy. My colleagues, one of these people, when we started doing the draft strategic plan, if you remember, we sent to all the USG or the head of the UN organization. And the colleagues who are dealing with humanitarian, he said, Maimuna, you are dealing with urban crisis. Can you put in your strategic plan that is urban crisis? That's why the fourth domain of our strategic plan is that to manage, to prevent if possible, and to respond to urban crisis. And how can we include the refugee and IDPs to integrate with the host community? And we did this through 4 pillars. One pillar is that we look into the strategic and spatial plan. This is also through working together with UNHCR. There's one example that we had in Kenya, Kolabie, Turkana. To me, it's a very successful example where we managed to integrate the IDPs, the refugees, into the host community, together with the stakeholders and also the member states. Second is one of the areas that we are proud of is that in Iraq, the Yazidi. We worked for the past 15 years, and I'm very happy to share the good news that in end of last year, the cabinet endorsed the decree to recognize the Yazidi and giving them the certificate of occupation for the IDPs, for the refugee. Second is we are, through the spatial and the development plan, I think what we need is that we need an immediate response. Immediate response, what we work together with UNHCR, OCHA, and at the same time, the emergency response. I think that is very, very important. Second is we need the short-term plan, medium-term plan, and the long-term plan, and I want to add another plan, sustainable plan. Not only the long-term, but it's sustainable plan.
Yeah.
This one through the data collection, innovation. I think this is very important for us to have the data in order to do the planning. And this is what UN Habitat is doing at the moment, the putting up the normative part of our work, collecting data, and assessing also the damage, and how can we use this data to rebuild and to regenerate the urban resilience. Second is how can we, as a moderator said just now, the multi-level governance. We are working very closely with the local government because whatever happened, the local government is the frontliner. Either it's COVID or crisis or climate change, we are at the local. So we work very closely with the local government and also to help them to provide some expertise for them to handle this crisis. And the third is, I would like to end, the third is on the finance. I think this one is not that UN Habitat giving finance to the stakeholders or to the mayors, but we fundraise together. And one of that is I would like to share with you here. We work very, very much with the Saudi Fund on and work in Iraq, and also in the philanthropies in our work in Yemen. So we work together with other UN agencies, not only us alone. And I hope that we can collaborate further with all of you, not only with the UN, but also with the private sector. We have a lot of program with Islamic Development Bank and also with the CRC. And I would like to see the opportunity for us to collaborate further and strengthen our input and our contribution to the people who need our service. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Maimouna. And the last point is a very good segue to my next question, which will be addressed to His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser. He spoke about finance and the importance of finance, the importance of complementarity also between the humanitarian track and the development track. Dr. Al-Jasser, the Islamic Development Bank is working to improve people's lives by promoting social and economic development in member states, as stated on the website of the bank itself. Noting that more than 50% of the displacement caseload comes from Muslim countries. How can development and humanitarian aid be combined to achieve sustainable impact, taking into consideration that we are seeing more and more protraction of crises that can take several decades to be resolved?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Khalid, and thank you to the King Salman Center for Humanitarian Relief for the invitation and for holding this wonderful conference where all parties engaged in the development process and the humanitarian aid process are gathered. We in the Islamic Development Bank are primarily engaged with the issues of development, which is a medium to long-term concern. Nonetheless, the short-term issues cannot be escaped. When you have, for example, what we have witnessed in Turkey and Syria and in other parts of the world, in Afghanistan, there is a need for this immediate relief. And this is the short-term part of the process. So in our development work, we are not oblivious to the short-term needs of the membership. For example, with the food crisis that happened recently, we in the Islamic Development Bank put together a package of $10.5 billion to be made available to finance the response to the food shortage and the food crisis. But the first one-third of it was to address the short-term issues, which is the relief issues, which is the immediate humanitarian needs of those countries. The other two-thirds are to address the medium to long-term concerns, which is basically to get the development process take place so such crises do not recur. And if they recurred again, they would be much more mitigated. Let's take an example of agriculture. Most of these countries, if they had good agricultural policy and good agricultural sector, then a lot of these problems would not have happened. So we go and we finance projects for agriculture. And let's remind ourselves that in our member countries, of which 21 are least developed, not less, least developed countries, agriculture is the bread and butter of people. 85% of the population live in rural areas. So if we enhance the agricultural sector, then people will have employment on the land, so they don't have to migrate, they don't have to move out. They have food on the table because they are growing their own food. They probably are producing more, so they're sending to the urban areas, and again, enhancing the livelihoods of people in the urban areas, and maybe even a surplus will go to finance industrialization and other issues. So in all of our programs that are development-based, there is a short-term humanitarian side. And this is, if we were to borrow the parable where they say, if you find a hungry person, don't give him a fish, give him a fishing rod. That's the same thing here. help them build their agricultural sector, and this will be feeding them for the long haul. We have, in the Islamic Development Bank, been very well focused on the developmental aspect of these countries. And we have noticed that if we address those, then the recurrence of these humanitarian crises is reduced significantly. And this is something that is very important for us at the Islamic Development Bank, and we will continue to cooperate with other agencies that have primarily short-term concerns, CRC and others, for example. They are there to alleviate the human suffering in the most immediate term. But we are working with them, we're collaborating with all of the organizations to address the short term while we are working diligently on the medium and long term. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you very much. Mr. Vitorino, Dr. Al-Jasser and Ms. Maimouna spoke about the movement into developing countries and rural areas and poor areas. And the movement of people happen because of many reasons, because of conflicts, but recently more and more because of climate change as well. How does IOM, as the UN Migration Agency, address displacement and protection risks of displaced people, especially in the context of climate change?
Thank you so much for the invitation from UNHCR and the King Salman Foundation. I would just like to say that in our view, climate change is a multiplier of other drivers of mobility. Cannot be isolated. Out of the 15 countries that are more fragile from the environmental point of view, you have conflicts in 12 of them. And you cannot distinguish if people move because of climate change or because of conflict. People move because of the interaction of the drivers, and then we need to find solutions to them. We work according to three main work streams. The first one is that because of climate change, people are forced to be displaced, but they do not want to move. So, building resilience in the communities, adaptation of the communities for the impacts of climate change is a top priority. And the president of the Islamic Bank spoke about agriculture. There you have a very good example. There is a lot to be done in the rural areas where the communities need to prepare the traditional productions to the impacts of climate change. In many places that will be possible. In other places, most likely, that will not be possible. And then we have the second work stream, if people have to move. But if people have to move, then they have to move in a safe, orderly, and regular manner. They need to be assisted, they need to be protected, and in our view, they need to move in a way that keeps the communities together. And the last stage is when they settle in another place. And then we have two options, whether the conditions are met for them to go back to the region of origin. That's one solution. The other solution is that we need to create conditions for them to settle in a new environment, to have a future life in the place they have moved to. And here we are talking about development. Here we are talking about creating the conditions for those communities to strive again. Access to public services, access to basic facilities, water, electricity, and that's where Maimouna comes in. Because this movement from the rural areas to the urban areas is massive. And the cities are not prepared to cope with this challenge. So this requires to call on urban planning, organization of public services, in order to create conditions for the communities that have moved to strive again. So it's very complex, it interacts, but from our side, we are working with the entire UN system in addressing this challenge.
Great, thank you very much. And now, I have a rare chance to ask my boss a question.
Be careful.
It's usually the other way around. Mr. Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees, we are witnessing unprecedented numbers of people forced to flee their homes because of conflict, because of violence, because of different reasons, including climate change. The number has exceeded 103 million people, and we are anticipating another increase by the end of the year. Major challenges. The Global Refugee Forum spoke mainly about burden sharing and how the world can share the responsibility of responding to displacement crises. We are planning for another round of the forum by the end of this year. My question to you, High Commissioner, is about what needs to be done until then, and what are you hoping to achieve in this second Global Refugee Forum?
Thank you, Khaled, and thanks to all other speakers. Well, I want to somehow build on what the previous speakers have already said. Because, as you pointed out, forced displacement is at unprecedented heights because of the world situation, and unfortunately, the trends seem to be going in the wrong direction. Of course, my organization, our organization, has a double mandate. Sometimes this is not very well known. You know, we are known as a humanitarian organization and one that has a specific protection mandate in respect of, especially of refugees, but also in the UN context of internally displaced people. And that is, of course, an important aspect of our work. Protection means ensuring access to safe countries or safe areas, means attention to the vulnerables, means good policies, good legislation, good practices on the parts of those hosting. So this will continue to be an important part of our work, supported by our partners. And of course, improving burden sharing in all those areas will remain an important focus of our work. The Global Compact on Refugees, that is now 4 years old, stipulates very clearly, or rather offers states in particular a toolbox on how to better deal with all these challenges. But the other part of the mandate of my organization, which is explicitly in its statute, is to help governments, in particular governments, find solutions to forced displacement. The best solution is naturally that people go back to their homes voluntarily, in an organized manner, well-supported, dignified, safe. That, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, depends on a favorable political environment, on a political solution. This morning, I mentioned in the other panel Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire went out of decades of civil war, re-established peace internally, with the support of the international community. There were 400,000 Ivorian refugees, 90% went back home, and by mid this year, together with the president of Côte d'Ivoire, we declared the end of refugee status for Ivorian refugees. A rare event, but one that we wanted to highlight because we said it's possible. If there is a solution, people can go back. It's not always doom and gloom. Sometimes it is possible. Through peace efforts, through development, Côte d'Ivoire is on a path to prosperity, not to increase poverty. So it's a combination of positive factors. But most of the time, unfortunately, these optimal solutions are a distant target. We should always think about them, but they're not for tomorrow, because the wars are raging, the conflicts are not resolved. In the countries of origin, often there are difficult economic, social conditions. So what to do in the meantime? Because that's also a solution, you know, what to do for the next 10 years. Can we afford that kids do not go to school or refugee patients do not have access to health services? This is why this morning I spoke of the importance of inclusion for those that are displaced. And the inclusion, even on a temporary basis for 10 years, for 5 years, requires investments that are not humanitarian, are development. And I have to say that in the last few years we've made a lot of progress, because inclusion is the core of the Global Compact on Refugees. At the first Global Refugee Forum, which you mentioned, Khaled, in 2019, we got hundreds of pledges for the inclusion of refugees and displaced people. And I hope, to answer your question, that for the next forum, which will take place this December, we will review the implementation of the pledges made, and fresh pledges will also be made. I want to make a special point on the forum. What we are trying to achieve is not simply countries saying, we want to do this, we want to do that, or institutions, not just countries, institutions as well. We want to match, as we call it, good practices, good policies by countries, for example, hosting refugees, for example, allowing refugees to have work permits. I give you an easy one. So we want these policies to be matched by good contribution by either donor governments or financial institutions or other partners that can support that good policy, good practice in a given country. The more we match, the more we hopefully encourage these policies and these practices to multiply, to become the norm, and to be well supported. Until, of course, in those countries, conditions are created for people to go back to their homes. So this is really, in a nutshell and in simple terms, what the forum wants to achieve. And I'm very encouraged. This morning, Dr. Mohamed El-Jasser and I signed an agreement between the Islamic Development Bank and UNHCR, a framework agreement, somehow we can call it. And this is very promising. 10 years ago, we would not have thought of that. But I think the context is moving, and a very humanitarian organization like ours, like ICRC, the fact that we can partner with a very development organization like the Islamic Development Bank is a good foundation for the approach that I have described.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Indeed, we keep repeating what you teach us always, that inclusion is the best type of protection. And this requires a lot of policy development and working with the legislation sector as well. My next question is for Mr. Michael Collar. And when we speak about policy development, we also think of ECHO and the importance ECHO gives to policy development in view of the protracted emergencies and the added triggers for displacement like climate change. How does ECHO change their policies to adapt with such developments in the world?
Yeah, thank you very much, Khaled, and thanks, of course, in particular to the Kingdom and to KS Relief for having us here. It's wonderful to be back after 3 years at the Riyadh Humanitarian Forum and to discuss these topical issues. Now, it was said this morning in the panel that humanitarian aid today intervenes in 8 out of 10 cases in man-made conflicts. Does that mean that we are discussing the wrong issue here? Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. Because obviously, and it was said by my honorable co-panelists, very often a man-made conflict is just the consequence of climate conflict. When the resource base diminishes, when there's no more water for a pastoralist society, for example, when there is drought for 5-6 years, this leads to displacement, it leads to conflict, it leads to instability, sometimes to war. So let's not be mistaken. There is a lot of climate impact even when you don't see it at first sight. But on top of that, you also have, unfortunately, the kind of direct impact of climate. And just if you look back the last 6 months, these devastating floods in Pakistan, 33 million people impacted, 10 million forcibly displaced by the floods. Or think of Somalia, 1 million people displaced because of the drought. They simply have to move elsewhere because they can no longer feed their cattle, they can no longer feed their families. Or even in Europe, we had a devastating wildfire season this summer. In countries like France, like Spain, like Greece, 150,000 people that were displaced because of fires in Europe. A totally new, very bad experience for us. That means we need to gear up to it. We have to factor this in our response, in our anticipatory action. What is important to understand is when there is climate-induced displacement, this is not only about the destiny of individual people who lose their homes, their livelihoods, basically the possibility to nourish their family. It also destroys communities. It destroys communities, which means it destroys resilience, it destroys economic basis, sometimes even culture, civilization. So there's a community and there is a macro financial impact and macroeconomic impact beyond the sheer humanitarian dimension. And that means we need to address the issue on all fronts. First, humanitarian aid needs to be there, if possible, already before the event. Anticipatory action, training, preparedness, stockpiling of goods that are necessary to help in such a situation. And there, I think the humanitarian sector, including DG ECHO, is really very much gearing up to that. Secondly, the way how we then deploy our aid needs to be multi-purpose. It needs to address the various needs that such people have. They do not only need food, they do not only need health care, they do not only need schooling, they need everything. And that means we should have very flexible funding, and we should have fungible funding. And that is one of the reasons why we go more and more for cash support, because the persons that are involved, affected by such a crisis, need money to buy drugs, to buy food, to buy, for example, the next blanket or tent that they need. So you need to put them in a position to really cater in a dignified way for their needs. About 32% of our aid now is cash support in that context. And obviously, I can only join Dr. Jasser, we need to come with a comprehensive response. Humanitarian aid does not do it all. Humanitarian aid helps immediately and buys time, but buys time for other forms of aid to come in, like development aid, to rebuild, to resettle people. So we need to think from day one in a nexus context. This has become a very, very marking feature for humanitarian and development aid, and we're spending huge amounts of money on this, and not only on the response, also on the anticipatory action. In more than half of our projects, we have today a disaster prevention component, because you better intervene before the ugly event than rather responding to it. So I think for ECHO, but also for other major agencies, disaster reaction and reaction to disaster displacement has become basically a new normal.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robert Mardini, when we mention ICRC, one immediately thinks of international humanitarian law, of the humanitarian principles, of what we used to call complex emergencies. But now I was just thinking, what do we call an emergency where people face an added emergency on top of their situation. So a complex emergency like Syria, and then you have the earthquake on top of that. So a disaster on top of a disaster. How does ICRC plan its work, especially in such situations where armed conflict is a factor, and then on top of that you have something that compounds the situation?
Well, thank you, Khalid, and also on my side, words of gratitude to the KS Relief for organizing the third Riyadh International Forum at this very important time where, unfortunately, we see more conflicts happening, coming on top of old conflicts with no end in sight. And most of those conflicts are compounded crises. There are conflicts on top of which comes more and more visibly the consequences of climate change, the recent socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently the global knock-on effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is affecting the very same people in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel region, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, who are bearing the brunt of those poly-crises or compounded crises. And you mentioned, Khalid, the ICRC and IHL, and I dare say that as guardians of IHL and international refugee law, respectively, so ICRC and UNHCR, have the responsibility to ensure respect for those very important bodies of international law. And this is why ICRC and UNHCR, we joined forces on the same advocacy messages about ensuring international protection for people on the move affected by conflict, on durable solutions for the displaced, and also protecting the displaced from returning to harm through the principle of non-refoulement, which is absolutely critical. And we see that climate change is exacerbating displacement of populations in many places. You mentioned Syria, which is now being devastated by an earthquake of an unprecedented magnitude, coming on top of 12 years of devastated conflict, where today I think in Syria it's even hard to capture the size, the scope, and the depth of suffering of the people being killed, being maimed. And Syria is also a place where water scarcity has been driving some tensions, even before the conflict started. So the very same people in the northeast of Syria and the northwest are really carrying the brunt and the challenges of those compounded crises. So what should happen? And I think all humanitarian organizations have been investing more and more on projects helping communities build their resilience to be able to absorb shocks beyond delivering food and water trucking in the immediate hours of an emergency. We have to pivot to projects to ensure the sustainability and the continuity of water supply, provision of health care services, and also supporting the livelihoods of people. For farmers and herders in places like the Sahel and Mali, our projects at ICRC aim really at helping them rehabilitate their irrigation projects, because this is their most valuable asset, to be able to produce food. For herders, also helping them store animal feed in community-led fashion. And I think this really makes the case for humanitarian organization joining forces with development actors, and we had the opportunity to discuss yesterday with Dr. Al-Jasir on how we can join forces, not for humanitarian organization to the work of development agencies, but just ensure or pave the way for development actors to maybe increase their appetite to risk in order to invest in those very communities affected by the intersection of conflict and climate change. In places like Gao, for instance, in northern Mali, it's a place that is not controlled by the government of Mali, and yet there are communities in need of dire water supply schemes. And you cannot do it by water trucking and with the money of ECHO and other traditional donors. You need to encourage development actors such as the African Development Bank to maybe be more daring and engage and find solutions with local actors in order to help communities exit from this vicious cycle of conflict, violence, and climate change exacerbating the stressor on communities.
Very much so. Thank you very much. And another good segue to my next question to Ms. Maimouna. I think there is an agreement amongst the speakers that we need to invest more in local capacities, because that is what makes the difference. The first responders are always the locals. The first responders are always local officials and local communities. How does UN Habitat work to strengthen the capacities of mayors, of municipalities, of local communities, especially in areas that are prone to disasters?
Thank you so much for that question. As a former mayor of the city of Penang, Malaysia, I faced the type of crisis when in 2017, where the whole city was flooded. And I also faced the same crisis where during the 2004, the tsunami. And at the same time, the refugee, Rohingya, who arrived at our coastline. And as a mayor, and as your question, to answer your question, as a mayor and as a frontliner, sometimes we are faced with very unprepared situation. And one area is that, as I mentioned earlier, we really need to establish the emergency response procedure. What shall we do? Because the first thing they will do is they will call the mayor. What shall we do, mayor? So I think this is very, very important. Now I am in in UN Habitat. First thing that is, and we are also a lot of my colleagues down there, they are looking at me, actually, Mr. Moderator, they said that you are last time part of us, but now you are there, please walk your talk and please help us. So I think what is the capacity here? We are facing with the 4C crisis. One is COVID-19, one is climate change, third is crisis, either is it natural or man-made, and fourth is the capacity. The capacity here, it can be the human resource capacity, the knowledge, the technology that is in the local government, or the actual capital of funding. So UN Habitat work very closely with through the network of mayors, for example, Global Task Force, C40, ICLE, and then the Global Parliament of Mayors, through sharing of the best practices, through sharing a better practices that the cities that we work with. And then this is the sharing is in many platforms. We have during our World Habitat Day, World Cities Day, World Cities Forum. Last year, the World Cities Forum in Katowice, we have around at least 10 urban crisis track. We discuss in Katowice during the World Urban Forum, and with all the stakeholders, we are putting the vertical and horizontal integration from the global, from the regional, from the national, and also from the the private sector, from community, from the NGO, and also from the youth and women. So these are the platforms that we can help the frontliner or the mayors. Second is that we also include, in terms of our work, training, capacity training. I think now we develop online training. Last time, before COVID, we have to go to the city to do the training. Now we have the online training. We came out with the syllabus, online training, in terms of the capacity, how to handle. And we have the program, the flagship program called, I just want to share with you here, that hopefully that we can have more partners to join us. Flagship program called Inclusive Cities, as what people said just now. Inclusive Cities, Enhancing the Impact of Migration. We are working together with UNHCR and IOM on this matter, and the stakeholders, the partners are the local government. The partners are the mayors. So I think this is an area that we need to strengthen together, and at the same time, in terms of the helping them to come up with the plan. Because without the plan, for example, I have the opportunity to go to Mozambique after the Cyclone Idai, and you can see a lot of displaced persons. And the mayor who were there talked to me, and now he's already passed away due to the COVID. And he said that, Maimuna, please help us to come up with the master plan, where I can hold to the master plan. We have the legal backing to say that the people cannot build the house in that area because they are below sea level. And I know that it's below sea level, but I don't have the tool to say no or to take action because there is no plan. So please help us to do the plan. So we are also looking to do the national urban plan, and at the same time the action plan, and help them to do the financing through the city's investment facilities, because sometimes they have the plan, but they don't have the funding to implement the plan. So through the city's investment facilities, where we launched during the World Urban Forum 2020 in Abu Dhabi, there are now already 64 cities with us. It started only with 34, 64 with us, that we pair them with the partners and the donors for them to implement their plan, and we as the partner to see whether the plan is aligned with the achievement of the 17 SDG and the 169 target.
Thank you.
So I call upon all the delegates here, please partner with us, with UN Habitat, partner with UNHCR, and partner with IOM, so that we can help more people, the people that we serve. Sometimes we want to do more, but we have a very limited resources. So please join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great call for action. Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, in the humanitarian sector, we use a strange term about the humanitarian development nexus. And sometimes you wonder, what does this mean, actually? I don't know if it is a nexus or a continuum, or what do we need to call it. But we always ask ourselves, how can we capitalize on the capacities of development organizations? And my question to you is, there something that we can do better as humanitarian organizations to improve this cooperation? And if there is something that development organizations can also do better to increase this cooperation in an innovative way with the humanitarian sector?
Thank you, Khalid, for a very good question. The first thing is that we, as representatives of all of these organizations, official, public, humanitarian, philanthropic, whatever we are, first we have to realize that we have to transcend our differences. There are differences, but we have to transcend them, because those who are trying to help, those who are trying to serve, cannot wait for us to resolve those petty differences between organizations. I think that's the first lesson and the first advice I would give to myself and to my colleagues on this panel and beyond. Second, we have good lessons also. We have proven that we are capable of doing some of that. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have been involved with the King Salman Relief and Humanitarian Center, and with the Qatar Fund for Development and the Gates, Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, to create, in 2016, to create what we call the Lives and Livelihoods Fund. This one we use to finance very important things, for example, fighting Ebola, fighting polio, a lot of poverty and health issues that were very, very devastating to the communities where they were. And we successfully implemented that. Syrian refugees with Spark and others. We've done some very good work on education of Syrian refugees in their refugee areas. There are one of my favorite stories. One of the philanthropists that have put money with us and asked us to be guardian of the money and to use them as best as we can. In Somalia, with all of the drought and all of the civil war and all of that, we found some human settlements, or call them villages or whatever you want to call them, where they wake up their daughters to go and walk 4 hours to the nearest well to fetch water and come back 4 hours again. 8 hours every day to fetch water for the families. We dug some wells in the village, built a school next to it, so you can imagine how transformational that operation has been. We have dug 65 wells in Somalia under that program, which was a philanthropic contribution by a philanthropist to help with that. There are so many stories. I mean, we have actually, this conference has been providing a spark for a lot of activities, and we're going to have, with I think the UNHCR and with the King Salman Relief Center, a conference on refugees, and that should be something that I call everyone to participate in. So there is, I mean, the recovery in these societies that have suffered from man-made and nature-made disasters really need all the help we can provide. So let's really do the best we can. I mean, that is really, I mean, it hurts when you see some places that are not getting the help for sometimes simple reasons, sometimes for political problems in the countries they are in, sometimes for logistical difficulties. We have to do our utmost. We have no excuse not to go and deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. High Commissioner, the question about burden sharing and what could make burden sharing and what could make the next Global Refugee Forum more successful. And we spoke about what we need to do more, what development organizations need to do more and better. What do you expect also from regional groups, regional powers, the countries? How can we make sure that we are following a solutions-oriented approach to displacement?
I would maybe take the question in a broad sense and then speak about the region. And to say that I just want to basically continue what Dr. Mohammed said. I don't know if it is, if you call it nexus, continuum. This is about working together, really. This is about working together in very simple terms. Now, it's not simple to do it, but it is possible, and I think we are I absolutely agree. We're proving it. In a way, you know, let's be very frank. We humanitarians in particular work in an environment that attaches much, and understandably, much importance to visibility, to mandate, to each organization having its own space. Donors want to have that visibility because they need to justify the use of their resources to their taxpayers. So all of this is normal in a way, but the magnitude of the challenges we have been talking about even on this panel, ranging from conflict to crisis to climate, natural disasters, they are such that we should not live in the era of individual action, but in the era of partnerships in terms of how we do our work. And I have seen myself, I also want to echo others, I have seen amazing work done when these partnerships are realized. You know, in a place like Kakuma in Kenya, this is a refugee area near South Sudan. Until a few years ago, this was one of the most difficult, challenging, derelict areas where people really struggled. And now, because of partnerships, we have launched pilots, projects, ideas that are really changing the lives of everybody, not only of the refugees, but also of the local communities. But that was only possible through cooperation. First and foremost, the leadership of the national and local authorities that gave that space. Then, of course, the humanitarians. Then, naturally, the development organizations, but also the private sector came in. We are cooperating with the IFC, the private sector branch, if you wish, of the World Bank Group, and they are doing what Robert was describing earlier. They are helping us de-risk investments for private sectors in a very fragile areas, and this has attracted in particular, through some appropriate incentives, the national private sector, the Kenyan private sector, that is investing there and creating employment and progressively taking people away from dependency of humanitarian assistance. I'm giving that example, and there's others that we are doing elsewhere, to stress that this is only possible through cooperation, through partnership. And of course, by putting in the center, in the middle, the people themselves. Because in the end, it's not anymore about giving them, but about making them self-reliant and able to lead and sustain their own lives. I think that this is burden sharing in the end. This is true burden sharing. Of course, on a much broader scale, I have to say what most countries hosting refugees say, that they are the ones carrying the biggest burden in terms of displacement. They are the biggest donors because they make available land and resources and water and space and political capital in order to host refugees. So their claim is we need more than just some payment to balance the sharing of that responsibility. I agree, but I would add that the best of that burden sharing is through this multi-partner approach that really can offer more sustainable solutions. And I do hope that that will happen at the next Refugee Forum. And before I close, if you allow me one more minute, is simply to say, to go to your other point, you know, I want to, like I did a bit this morning, but with more time now, appeal to this region in which we are now. We are, many of us, international organizations, UN, NGOs, and others are increasingly working in this region. this region has a wealth of energy, of resources, of new approaches, of philanthropy, of solidarity. It has a lot more even to offer the world. And I really want to appeal to organizations that are present here, representatives of civil society in this region, governments, foundations, come on board in what we have described, in this new model of partnerships, because your energies, your resources, your solidarity, your culture of philanthropy are very much needed by the whole world.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Vitorino, all the factors that the speakers and yourself spoke about lead to movement of people. People move because of persecution, they move because of violence, they move also because of economic situations. And that's what we jointly in the system call mixed movement of people. How do we work together as a humanitarian system to make sure that the protection needs of everybody are met, not only people who are forcibly displaced, but people who also move out of economic difficulties?
I believe that today movements are in its vast majority mixed movements. As I said before, it's very difficult to distinguish what is the main driving force for someone to move. Yes, we know there are legal categories, refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, but then you have a large group of people that moves due to the interaction of different drivers. And as I said also before, I strongly believe that climate change is a multiplier and accelerator of movement because of other reasons, because inequalities, poverty, lack of governance, lack of security are drivers of mobility. And when people are on the move, they are prone to the same risks and they have the same needs. Risks of traffic, risks of abuse, of gender-based violence, of sexual exploitation and abuse, of labor exploitation, but also they are in need of humanitarian assistance, life-saving assistance, and particularly for those who are internally displaced, there is a need to provide accommodation, shelter, basic necessities, hygienic necessities, and then, of course, if they settle, there is a need to provide education and access to health care. So these needs need to be taken on board by the entire UN system, building on the capacities of the different actors, the different players. And that's why I agree with Filippo when he mentioned that we need to move beyond the mandates. And we need to find the most articulated solutions, bringing on board to the solutions what each stakeholder can bring best. And this involves not just the UN system. This involves the multinational, the multilateral financial institutions that have a key role to play. This involves also the private sector. This involves the civil society. This is the joint endeavor if we want to keep human values up there in our societies.
Great, thank you. The need for more partnership, and my question is for Mr. Mardini this time. ICRC works with everybody, states and non-state actors, and at the same time tries to uphold the humanitarian principles. How could ICRC coordinate with other agencies in the field and at the same time maintain its privileged access in disaster areas, especially in compounded crises?
No, thank you, Khalid. This is a very important question, and I think the macro equation is rising humanitarian needs because of unresolved conflict, shrinking aid budgets. So the gap, unfortunately, is widening, and I can only join Filippo by saying how important it is to invest in partnerships. I mean, for ICRC, partnership starts within the Red Cross, Red Crescent family with 192 national societies, 15 million volunteers on the ground. But I think there is no question that partnership should be extended across the aid sector among UN agencies, NGOs, but also local actors and other actors, multinational development banks, IFIs. It is clear that today there are many positive stories of that collaboration. If you take, for instance, the project in Goma, where in the outskirts of Goma today there are 300,000 people who have been displaced by the conflict in the eastern DRC, who have no access to water. There is no question that a humanitarian organization can address a project of such a magnitude. And I think the work that ICRC has done with Régie des Eaux was to encourage the World Bank to come. We did the study, and today the project will be is underway, and it will be implemented by the World Bank and other actors, and that is leveraging for people affected by armed conflict without doing it ourselves. I think it's about also playing sometimes a catalytic role, creating a spark so that other actors can feel comfortable and overcome maybe their institutional reflexes and discomfort to be able to operate in those difficult places, because the clock is ticking, conflict is not being resolved, there are more conflicts, and the only silver lining is to foster collaboration in those difficult places and create solutions for people affected by conflict, climate change. I think another big challenge is the fact that, let's face it and let's be honest, there is almost zero climate action and zero climate finance reaching countries affected by armed conflict. So I think much more needs to be done in order to create the comfort for those critical funds to reach also communities at the very local level and support the locally led action of communities that will help them reach or being on the path of self-sustainability.
Very much so, and this was the spirit of the localization agenda during the World Humanitarian Summit as well, which brings me to the last question in this panel, to Mr. Kohler. And we spoke about the increasing demands also on donor agencies. Increasing needs come with increasing demands and increasing expectations. How does the European Union, how does ECHO deal with such an increase in humanitarian demands year after year?
Well, the short answer to your excellent question is just focus on it. But how do you do that? First, indeed, we need money. We need resources. There's never enough of it. And I can only, like Robert, I can only echo, obviously, what Filippo said about more resources that are required for that. But at least when you start at home, you need to do something with your own resources. And in the European Union, we have dedicated 10% of our development assistance to displacement and migration issues. 35%, and here we're speaking about 30 billion euros until 2027, is dedicated to climate-related issues. And in my department, we have a specific budget line for disaster prevention, which again adds about 100 million or so. So first you need money. Then you need to find out what do you want to do with it. You need to conceptualize. And therefore last summer we have given ourselves a strategy on disaster and climate-related displacement. This is a policy paper that brings together humanitarian and development aid in the nexus spirit that colleagues here described so well. And thirdly, I think you need to bring about international cooperation, coordination, and advocacy. This is why DG ECHO on behalf of the EU, accepted to take the co-chair of the International Platform on Disaster Displacement in Geneva, together with our co-chair, Kenya. In this platform, we provide advocacy. We bring international donors, countries, stakeholders together for better coordination, to put the issue on the international agenda, to do research and data collection, but ultimately also to come with concrete proposals on how the Nexus methodology could work out in given scenarios. Our presidency, our chairmanship of this platform will end in half a year, and we're very keen for other countries to take over, because only if this becomes a perpetuous, coordinated international effort, then the scarce resources that we have can be used in a coordinated way, and we want to pull our weight behind that.
Thank you very much. And before I close this discussion, I will give every speaker 30 seconds exactly to send a message to the millions of people who need our assistance and who need the assistance of many actors around the world. If you have 30 seconds to send them a message, what would you say? So we start from Dr. Jasser.
Me?
Yes, you raised
Okay.
your hand. You volunteered.
Humanitarian help and development are inseparable, but they cannot be done by one organization, as big as it may be. It can only be done by all of us, all the international organizations. Let's transcend our differences, intensify our coordination, and be generous at this time of need.
Very good. Ms. Maimouna?
Yeah, I try to be short. From what I can see from the trend just now that we have discussed, that urbanization of humanitarian crisis. And urbanization of humanitarian crisis here is also involve resident, refugee, IDPs, and migrant. Everybody. We are not only talking about refugee and also the role of cities as an urban solution.
Okay.
And not forgetting the rural areas. So I think this is very important. And again, I would like to call to action on sustainable urbanization. Let flip the narrative that urbanization is bad. Let flip the narrative that urbanization, sustainable development is the solution to the urban crisis. Thank you
very much. Mr. Mardini, 30 seconds.
Working. Yes, my message to people affected by conflict and compounded crises, those people living on the front line of these compounded crises, that the ICRC and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement's support is unwavering, and will continue to do everything we can to come up with the most sustainable solution for their needs and upholding their dignity in the worst of circumstances.
Thank you. Mr. Kohler?
We want to make every effort not to treat you as subjects of our assistance, but as partners, so that we listen to your needs and help you either to integrate where you are now or to go back safely and in a dignified manner with the help of the international community.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vitorino?
Well, no matter how large, big, smashing are the challenges, we truly believe that the agency and the empowerment of the communities are at the center of the solutions, because the international system is there to help them, to support them, to work to their benefit, but they need to be the protagonists of the real sustainable solutions.
Mr. Grandi, the last 30 seconds are yours.
And I will start like Antonio did. No matter how big the challenges, and believe me, if you sit in some of our seats anyway, all of our seats actually, you can see how big they are, those challenges. Please don't give up. And we all have something to contribute, whether we are governments or international institutions and organizations, civil society, NGO, philanthropic groups, individual citizens. We can all make a difference, and we owe that hope, that giving hope to those that are really impacted in the front line of being impacted by all the difficult crises that we have spoken about. So please, don't give up.
Last message, don't give up. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.